Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this digital photo video lesson. One of the most exciting things about using layers and selections is that they give you the opportunity to push your images beyond the realms of a simple photograph. Yes, a single striking picture can be worth 1,000 words, but you can also create sensational images using more than one photo at a time. This kind of photo collage is guaranteed to have people asking just how you did it, and it can also make a brilliant gift for your friends and family. Here, layers have been used to position and move the separate elements of the composition around, placing multiple photos right where we want them. And to make it all work together, several different methods are used, from hard edges to softer edges and a mixture of the two, creating a really seamless and pleasing blend. At first glance, all of this may look a bit complicated, but it's really just a case of using some basic selections in tandem with either the eraser tool or a layer mask, and of course putting it all together using the layers palette. We don't even need to use any blending modes here, because we're trying to create a feeling that these are all still separate images, albeit those that are working together in a wider composition. And that makes it a little bit different to a montage or a composite technique, both projects which we'll come onto later in this special guide. Before you follow along with me and give this technique a try, make sure you gather a few pictures together and pick one of them to use larger than the rest as the composition's centerpiece. You can then use smaller photos to build up a framing effect around the main subject. And this makes for a much more satisfying composition, because you don't want your eye flicking around the image too much. You want it to be drawn to a focal point. I've picked 9 pictures of my dad to use here, which start at a very young age and kind of move through to the point where you stop counting. You'll only know which pictures really fit well together by experimenting with them as you work through the layout. But in general, and for a framing effect a bit like this, try using pictures where the subject or subjects are looking into the composition rather than out of the frame. You can then go about building up the photo collage in Photoshop or Elements, and if I just turn off all of these eye icons and all of the masks that we've used, you can see that we've simply placed these pictures working from the top of the image down until we've filled up all areas of the canvas. And as each one is added, we just use those selection methods and the eraser tool or the layer masks to just blend it in really nicely, getting rid of those most of those hard edges, until we've ended up with a final composition that works really well. Something else to consider when preparing and picking the images that you want to use for this technique is how the different colours in the shots are going to work together. In this case, I've gone for 9 black and white images, which just takes that worry out of the equation and makes things a little bit more simple to put together. But you might like to use a kind of a full colour image as your centerpiece, and then just build up the black and white shots around the edge. And once you've given this technique a go, you'll discover what a hugely fun project it is, and one that lets you kind of delve deep into your back catalogue of pictures. So grab a handful of shots and we can get started. I'll just close down our finished version here. And then we want to create a new Photoshop document. Come up to File and down to New, give that a click, and you'll get some options on screen. And starting up at the top, I'm just going to call this one Family Collage. And then for the size of the document, well, this is kind of up to you, but what it does make sense to do is pick an image size where you know you can print it out quite easily. So as a lot of people have got A4 sized home printers, I'm going for that size. So next to Preset, click on the downward facing arrow, choose International Paper, then set the size to A4. Of course you can choose larger or smaller versions, depending on how big you want your finished image to be. Leave the width and height as they are, and under resolution just make sure that's set to 300 pixels per inch, that the color mode is RGB color, it's set to 8-bit, and the background contents are white. You can then click OK, and you'll see that new blank document appear on screen. And in terms of using layers and understanding how they work, it just helps to think of this as a blank white sheet of paper that we're going to put our other photos on top of. What I am going to do before we start though is just rotate the canvas so it's in landscape format. So we'll just come up to Image, down to rotate canvas and pick 90 degrees clockwise. And there we go. Once you've done that, it's time to open the first image that you want to use in your collage. In this case, the central image, the one that's going to be larger than all the others. So again, come up to File, this time down to Open. And just by scanning through these separate files, I'm going to come down to the one just here. And once that's highlighted, just click OK to open it. Next up, we need to get this image into our main document. And there are several ways we can do that. And in some of the other video lessons on this CD, we've used the cutting and pasting method, but here I'm going to use the Move tool. So just make sure that both images are visible on screen at the same time. If they're not, just come up to Window, down to Arrange and pick Cascade. And then with the photo image active there on screen, simply click within it using the Move tool and drag that cursor all the way out of the image and over onto your blank sheet of paper. Once you do that, you will see a plus sign appear next to the cursor, and then you can release the left mouse button and it'll drop in. After that, we don't need our photo image anymore, so we can close that down. And then so long as you've got your layers palette open in Photoshop or Elements, if you haven't, it's under Window and Layers, you will see that our photo layer has dropped in as layer 1 above the background layer. And just as in those earlier video lessons where we talked about the basics of layers, we can now click and drag that around wherever we want it. So something around about there should be okay. It looks like I'm just going to have to reduce the size of this central image ever so slightly because I want that bird, that pigeon, to fit in at the top of the screen. So to do that, I'm just going to press Ctrl and T on the keyboard and then pick up one of these corner handles. Make sure that the option to constrain the proportions is selected. That's this one up here in Photoshop, called Maintain Aspect Ratio. In Elements, it's just called Constrain Proportions. Make sure that one's active, and then we can just click and drag those corner handles in to make our central image fit in the middle of the paper. So something around about there should be fine. We can hit Return or double click within our transform marquee to make that change permanent. And once that's in position, we can begin the collage proper by opening up the second picture that we want to use. Same route as before, File and then Open. And this time I'm going for this second picture, and we've picked one here where, again, as I said in the introduction, the subject is kind of looking to the left, and that means when we drag it in and we use it on the right-hand side of the frame, just closing down the original there, we create this nice framing effect. I'll just have to transform this one down as well. So I've re-entered the free transform mode there. And once again, we'll make sure that our Maintain Aspect Ratio option is ticked, dragging those corner handles, and then keep reducing that photo in size until it fits in with the rest of the composition. Now what I want to do here really is make this image sort of a fair amount smaller than the central subject, otherwise we lose that kind of sense of balance. And I'm just kind of clicking and dragging within that transforming marquee just to push it sort of roughly into position where it should be. So that's looking kind of okay about there. Don't worry about this vacant area around the images that we're adding to our collage. We can get rid of all that later using the crop tool. And once that's in position, I can just double click it again to set the size of that photo. And now we can take a look at how we're going to blend this picture into the other one. For the pictures at the top of the frame here that we're building up, we're going to use a very simple blend, and we can apply that either using a layer mask or by using the eraser tool. As we're in the full version of Photoshop here, I'm going to add a layer mask to this layer, and I can do that by coming right down to the bottom of the Layers palette and clicking on the Add Layer Mask icon. As soon as I do that, the layer mask appears next to it within the Layers palette, and then if I zoom in on that area of the image a bit, we can see how the blending process is done. First, we're going to want to pick the brush tool from the toolbox. Then up in the options bar, we need to make a few alterations to its size and its opacity before we can use it within the mask. Now I'm going to want to bring that brush size up a little bit, so we can click on the downward facing arrow and just set that master diameter at about 60 or 70 pixels. And then we also want to make sure that we're using a soft edge brush, so we need to drag that hardest slider down to 0%. A little further along, we need to click and set our opacity up at 100% for now. And then making sure that black is set as our foreground color down here at the foot of the toolbox. If it's not, just hit the default foreground and background colors icon there, and then swap them over with this double-headed arrow to make sure that black is the foreground. And then it's a simple case of painting onto the image, and you'll see that as I do that, we start to blend in the two photos, just losing that hard line that we don't want. So with that opacity set up at 100%, we'll first just kind of make sure that we've lost all of this hard edge, and then we can just feather that join a little bit by reducing the opacity of the brush down to about 20%. And then I'll also just kind of increase that brush size just using the keyboard shortcut for increasing the brush size, which is the right hand square brackets key, just bringing that up to about 100 pixels or so. And then we can just paint a few times just to get a nice gradual join between those two layers. Now as I'm doing that, if you take a look at this layer mask that's building up next to the photo, you'll see that anywhere we're painting black or shades of grey, we're letting the photo below this layer show through. And that's really all there is to layer masks. You simply paint black in where you want to completely hide the layer that it's attached to, like we did with that hard edge. You paint in shades of grey to get a kind of a mixture of the two. And if you think you've made a mistake and you want to go back and restore that photo to view, just swap over your foreground and background colours, making sure that white is now the foreground colour. Set that opacity back up to 100%, so you're painting white into the mask. And if I now paint on to the image, you'll see that that original hard edge returns, because we've removed those black areas that we painted into the layer mask. So really we're just painting white in to correct any mistakes that we've made. That wasn't a mistake, of course, so I can press Ctrl and Z on the keyboard to just take us back to our nice bit of feathering that we did there. And the other thing that it's important to consider when using layer masks is just to make sure that you've actually got your layer mask selected when you're painting in. You can see it's selected because it gets a little frame around it within the layers palette, and if I click on the actual photo layer, you'll see that the frame transfers to that. Of course, if we try painting black or white into our photo layer, well, we're just going to get black on our photo. We don't want that there, we want it in the mask. So it's Ctrl and Z again to get rid of that, and we want to make sure we're painting into the mask with its frame around and not making any mistakes. Now, as I said before, if you're using Elements software, you don't have access to layer masks, so you'll need to use the eraser tool, and you can get an identical effect with that tool. You just don't have quite the same flexibility. Give it a click in the toolbox, and then you'll find some very familiar looking options up here where we can set our size of the eraser down to exactly what we had before, around 60 or 70 pixels. That hardness we get in Elements, of course, from picking the brush, as I said before, and we also have our opacity to choose as well. And just as a little demo, if I click back on the photo layer there, you can see that again we can reveal the photo behind just by kind of erasing the pixels on that layer. Taking it a little bit too far now, so I'll just press Ctrl and Z again. And as I say, the only real difference with using the eraser tool is that you don't get to correct your mistakes or fine-tune the results quite as easily. Other than that, you'll see that the results are just as good. So now that we've got the second photo into our photo collage, it's time to bring in another. We'll come back out to a full view for a moment, then back up to File, down to Open, and as it makes sense to work kind of from the top of the image down, and you'll see why as we continue to move through the technique. I'm going to select another of the images that I want to use at the top of the frame here, clicking Open. Once again, using that Move tool to simply click and drag it into our main composition, closing down the original, then using that Free Transform tool just to resize the layer, bringing it down in size. And this time, instead of using that Maintain Aspect Ratio icon up there in the options bar, I'm just holding down the Shift key on the keyboard just to keep everything in proportion. And just as we did before, reducing that photo in size so that it doesn't dominate our central image, and then we can kind of click and drag it roughly into place. So again, something like that should be okay, I think. We can double click to finalize that transformation. And then something that's quite handy when working on multi-layered images of this kind is just to use the opacity setting within the layers palette just to check what's going on behind the image that you've just added. And if I click and drag that, we can just see that that pigeon that we want to bring back using the blending in a moment. It's just sitting kind of roughly where we want it, but I can perhaps just drag that layer around a little bit just to fine-tune its location. And then we can bring our opacity back up to 100% so the whole of that layer 3 photo is visible. Something else to consider when clicking and dragging these layers around is whether you want to use the Auto Select option in tandem with the Move tool. Currently it's unselected, and that means that the layer needs to be highlighted for me to move it. So in this case I can click anywhere on the image and drag that layer 3 around. But if I click on the Auto Select option, I can click directly anywhere on the image and it'll pick up the layer that I'm clicking on and move that around. So even though layer 3 is still selected in the layers palette, I can click on this one, layer 2, and I can move that around, and it's just a nice little shortcut really. The only thing I'd say in warning is that if you are new to using layers, it can all get a little bit complicated and you may get frustrated clicking and moving around the wrong object. So it's probably best to leave that unticked if you're starting out, and just click within the layers palette to highlight the layers that you want to move before you move them. So there we are, back on layer 3 and clicking and dragging that around. And so now, just as before, we can add our layer mask to layer 3, pick up the brush tool from the toolbox, just increase its size a little bit, and then we'll also zoom in a touch on the image just so we can get a good view of what we're doing. And then again, before we start painting, just make sure that black is set to that foreground colour, and we can start just kind of getting rid of that hard edge and creating a nice join between the two pictures. And we'll just click a little bit further into that area so that we can pick up the pigeon there. And it looks like I've just gone a little bit too far there, bringing some of that edge from the lowest layer, layer 1, through. So it's time to switch over to white as our foreground colour again. Then just bring that brush size down a touch, and we can paint back into that area to hide those parts of layer 1 that we don't want to see. Okay, so that's quick and easy. We've achieved a similar effect now on both sides of the image, and we've got the top area of our framing effect nicely sorted. That means, of course, that it's time to bring in another image to work on. So it's back up to File, down to Open, and this time I'm going to go for more of a full-length figure. Click Open and move it into the main composition in exactly the same way as before, clicking and dragging it in, closing down the original, and then using that free transform tool to just resize the picture on screen. Again, you'll see that every time I'm adding one of these new layers, it's appearing at the top of the layers palette. I think we'll leave that at roughly the size that it is. That's looking pretty good. We can double click inside that marquee again. But this time, instead of adding a layer mask and creating this kind of soft blend between the layers, I'm first going to use a selection so that we get a really nice mix of a hard edge and a soft edge to the areas that we want to blend in. We will need to add a layer mask before we continue though, but we'll leave it blank for the moment, so it's down to the Add Layer Mask icon again. Give it a click, it'll appear in the Layers palette, and then we can zoom in on the picture a little bit, come over to the toolbox and use one of the more freehand selection tools, this time picking the polygonal lasso tool. In fact, I'm going to zoom in a fair bit closer now, just so we get a nice accurate selection. And before we start clicking and selecting, let's just take a quick look at the options bar up here. We need to make sure that the tool is set to new selection, that the feather is set at 0 pixels, and that anti-alias is ticked. Then, taking as much time and care as you can, just start clicking around the subject in the photo that you want to use, or that you're using in this area of the picture, and taking a little bit more care and attention than I am here, because I'm just working through this fairly quickly. Just keep clicking around your subject, creating a nice accurate selection of them. The slower and more steadily you click, the better your selection will be. And the really important thing is that you don't want to click too fast in this case, because if you do click too fast, you'll see that this happens. Something that's really annoying and has been the bane of many Photoshop users' lives. The computer thinks that you want to finish your selection way too early, and so the marching ants appear and you feel like you have to go back and start all over again. In this case, thankfully, we don't need to do that. We can just set it to add to selection up here in the options bar, a little plus sign appears next to our polygonal lasso tool icon, and then we can just carry on clicking. So as I said before, just trying to be as careful as possible over those areas that we want to remain visible. We'll just continue to click around the subject, trying not to take in any of the background, and pretty soon we'll work our way down to the area where we want to leave the background in this particular image. We don't want to kind of create a complete cutout here. We want to leave some of the original photo in. So when we're down sort of round about this far, we can just click out to the edge of the picture, then down and around the bottom of it, just taking in all of the area that we want to remain visible, and then back over, and then just taking the new selection up inside that old selection, bringing it back round to the point where we started it, giving that a click, and then the marching ants are running all the way around those areas we want to keep. Now what I want to do next is just add a slight softening effect to the edge of our selected area, just to fit in with the fuzziness of this old photo. But really, even if your photo's pin sharp, you'll still need to use a little bit of feathering to get it looking nice. So we'll click on the Refine Edge button up there in the options bar, drag that feather slider down, and in this case I'm going to use, I think, sort of 1.5 or 2 pixels of feather, because it's slightly soft, this old photo. That's looking pretty good. We can click OK once we've added our feathering there, and then before we start using our masking tool or our eraser, we just need to invert this selection. I'll just zoom out a little bit before I do that, because we don't want to be erasing the area within the selection, we want to be erasing the part outside of it. So to invert the selection, come up to Select, down to Inverse. You'll see the position of those marching ants changes, and then with our layer mask still active in the layers palette, we can come back over to the brush tool, and then just as before, we can control the size of the brush, make sure that its opacity is up at 100%, that the foreground color is set to black, and then I'm just going to sweep it across the hard edge there, and it looks like we're getting a bit of a funny effect, yeah, because our layer 4 there has somehow got itself set to dissolve. So we need to change our blending mode there back to normal, make sure that layer mask is still active, and we can carry on painting. That looks a lot better. So now you'll see is when I sweep the brush past that selection, we get a really nice kind of mixture between the soft feathered join and the hard edge that we've selected. So just being careful, we can get a really lovely sort of cutout effect on our picture. Just sweeping that brush down a little bit further there, but not so far as I've done there and taking it all the way down to the edge of the selection. We don't want a hard edge there. So just as before, we want to switch back to white, return a little bit of that area, and we can switch between white and black quite easily on the keyboard just by pressing the X key, and I think that's really starting to look pretty good. Just as before, it works exactly the same with the eraser tool, but just be a little bit careful because you don't have that facility to reverse what you've done quite so easily. And once you've got to this stage, just press Ctrl and D on the keyboard, or come up to Select and down to Deselect to get rid of those marching ants. And you can see that we've got a really lovely effect there. And it looks a lot better than if we had simply got a sort of a fuzzy edge running around the edge of that photo. The mixture is really nice. What I do need to do though is just keep that soft edge going down the left-hand side of the picture. So we can do exactly that. Just keeping that effect going. I'm not too worried about the bottom of the picture here because that's going to be covered up by another photo. Right, so coming out to a full view again, what I'm going to do now is add another picture on the left-hand side of the photo collage using exactly the same method as I've done here. Let's bring it in then, coming up to File, down to Open, choosing the picture that we want to use, and just as before, using that Move tool to click and drag it into the composition. Closing down the original, resizing it to fit, and clicking and dragging it into place. Somewhere around about there should be okay for this one. And so what I'm going to do is use exactly the same method that I did for this picture. I'm going to first make a selection around the subjects, the parts of the picture that I want to keep, and then use a layer mask or the eraser tool to get that really fantastic mixture of a hard and a soft edge. But as it's exactly the same as this one, I'm going to leave you for a moment, get all that done, as well as adding some other pictures along the bottom of the frame in exactly the same way. So I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so here we are after I've done that little bit of selection work and the masking to bring in our fifth photo into the collage, and you can see that it's working really nicely. No sleight of hand has been done here. It's been added in exactly the same way as we did on layer 4, and I can show you that if I just press Alt and click on the attached mask there. You can see here's our layer mask that we added to layer 4, just holding back those areas covered in black. Just press Alt and click again to get rid of that preview, and if I do the same on layer 5, you can see that the effect is just the same. We're simply using those hard edges to keep the subject separate from the layer below, and then those soft brushes to just subtly blend in the rest of the photo. And there's no secret to adding the rest of the images that make up the composition. They're all added in exactly the same way. Just by first making a selection of the subjects to kind of give that cutout effect, and then using those low opacity brushes within the mask again. Or of course using the eraser tool if you're following this technique using Photoshop Elements. And as I said at the start of this tutorial, although the effect may seem pretty complex, it really is just a case of building up those individual layers one after the other. Just first using those simple blends at the top, then the more complex ones below, so we get that nice overlapping effect, and before long you'll have a really pleasing finished photo collage. A couple of things left to do though. First we need to crop off these unsightly edges. That's just part and parcel of making up the collage. We know that it won't fit perfectly as we're constructing it because we need to push and pull those elements around, so we just need to kind of clean it up using the crop tool. Then I'm going to add a subtle border around the picture, and finally just give it a little bit of a toning effect just to finish it off nicely. So coming over to the crop tool first, we don't want any restrictions up here in the options bar, so if you do have any there, just click on the option marked clear, and then we can just click and drag it out over the parts of the image that we want to keep. So just bring it in from that side ever so slightly, that'll do. And then this side we've got still a bit of that white left, so we'll bring it into about there. And when you're happy with your crop, just as we did with that free transform tool, simply double click inside the cropping marquee. Now, because we've of course cropped off those edges, our image will no longer fill that A4 sheet. It'll be a little bit more centralized, and what I'm also going to do is add a little bit of a border to it, simply by reducing the size of the central image, so we keep those document dimensions and we can still print it out nice and easy. To do this, I'm going to flatten all of these layers, bar the background layer, taking them into a single sort of compressed layer, and the way that I'm going to do that is by unclicking the eye icon on the background layer, then coming up to Layer and down to Merge Visible. Give that a click, all of those layers will become compressed. Bar the background layer because that was invisible at the time, and then we can turn that one back on. Keep the photo layer selected, and then it's back to our old friend, the free transform tool, Control and T on the keyboard. This time holding down the Alt key as well as the Shift key on the keyboard, and clicking and dragging those corner handles in just a little, and we can create a nice border to that picture, just setting it off really nicely. Again, just double click within the transforming marquee, and finally we'll see about that toning effect just by adding an adjustment layer to the top of the layer stack here. Quite a small layer stack compared to what we had before, but we'll just click on the adjustment layer icon there at the bottom of the palette. We'll pick Hue Saturation from the list, and then within here find the box marked Colorize, give that a click, and then we'll drag this hue slider up to around about 30 or 35, and that's just giving us a nice pleasing sepia toned effect that's a bit warmer and more eye-catching than that original black and white. We can just drop the saturation slightly as well if the effect is a little bit too harsh, and then click OK to exit the palette. And there you have it, a really attractive collage image built from 9 separate photos. Pick out some of your own old shots and have a go at putting together your own photo collage using the layers palette, because you really will find it's a very rewarding and fun technique to try. Okay, all that's left for me to do is come up to Layer and down to a final flattened image, and our picture is ready for printing and hanging on the wall. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.